I sat in the due diligence meeting, watching the potential buyer's lawyer slide a document across the mahogany table to the founder. The room fell silent as he read aloud. Who is the sole proprietor listed for the core technology patents? When he announced my name, every face turned toward me in shock. The founder's expression crumbled. 2 weeks earlier, I had been fired for disloyalty after consulting a lawyer about my concerns. Now, sitting in this sterile conference room, I realized my termination might have been the biggest mistake they ever made. 3 years ago, I was Tricia Coleman, a 28-year-old software engineer from Portland, Oregon, fresh off completing my master's degree at Oregon State University. My thesis focused on AI-driven logistics optimization, and I was passionate about revolutionizing supply chain management through predictive algorithms. When Marcus Sterling, a charismatic entrepreneur in his 50s, offered me a position at his startup Innovate Tech Solutions, I jumped at the opportunity. Innovate Tech was everything you'd expect from a Portland tech startup. We had 12 employees, a ping-pong table in the break room, craft beer Fridays, and that tight-knit family culture that made working 80-hour weeks feel like a privilege rather than a burden. Marcus had founded the company with his son, Bradley, a 26-year-old who served as our chief technology officer. Bradley had an MBA from Stanford and big ideas about disrupting traditional logistics, but his technical knowledge was surface level at best. They hired me specifically because of my thesis work on predictive supply chain algorithms. During my interview, Marcus told me they wanted to build something revolutionary, something that would change how companies managed their delivery networks. I was thrilled to find a place where my academic research could have real-world impact. For the first 6 months, I threw myself into the work completely. I spent 18 months developing what would become our flagship product, revolutionary logistics prediction software I named Flowcast. While my colleagues left at 6 p.m. for happy hour, I stayed until midnight debugging code, testing machine learning models, and refining user interfaces. Some nights I just slept on the office couch, rather than drive home to my apartment. I created the entire core algorithm architecture from scratch. The machine learning models that predicted delivery delays, optimized routing patterns, and anticipated supply chain disruptions were all my design. I built the user interface, wrote the documentation, and even handled the database optimization. It was my baby, born from countless late nights and weekend coding sessions. Being naturally organized, I documented everything meticulously in my personal engineering notebooks. Every algorithm decision, every code revision, every breakthrough moment was recorded with timestamps and detailed explanations. I even took photos of my whiteboard sessions when I was working through particularly complex problems. As a precaution, I filed provisional patent applications under my own name, planning to transfer them to the company once we had proper legal structures in place. Bradley provided minimal input during the development process, mostly cheerleading and sharing business development ideas. He'd pop by my desk occasionally to ask how things were progressing, nod enthusiastically when I explained technical challenges, and then head off to networking events or investor meetings. His contributions were primarily strategic rather than technical, which made sense given his business background. The results spoke for themselves. Flowcast beta testing showed 92% accuracy in delivery predictions, far exceeding industry standards. Major retailers who tested our system reported cost savings of up to 30% in their logistics operations. Trade show demonstrations drew crowds of interested potential clients, and industry publications began writing about our innovative approach. I received Employee of the Month recognition 3 consecutive times. Marcus Sterling publicly praised my innovation at our monthly all-hands meetings, calling Flowcast the future of supply chain management and crediting me as the brilliant mind behind our breakthrough technology. The validation felt incredible after years of academic research that never saw practical application. However, I began noticing subtle changes in how Bradley discussed the project. During client presentations, he started taking increasing credit for overseeing the project direction and architecting the overall solution. Initially, I assumed this was normal executive positioning for external audiences. After all, he was the CTO, and clients probably expected him to be the technical leader. But during one particularly important client presentation to a regional grocery chain, I discovered something that made my stomach drop. Bradley was telling the investors that he had developed the core technology, describing me as merely his assistant coder who helped implement the vision. I sat in the back of the conference room, watching him present my algorithms as his own innovations, complete with technical details had obviously memorized from my documentation. After the presentation, I approached Bradley privately in his office. My hands were shaking as I knocked on his door, but I knew I had to address this directly. Bradley, I need to talk to you about the presentation. You told the clients that you developed Flowcast's core algorithms. He looked up from his laptop with that patronizing smile I was beginning to recognize. Trisha, you're being oversensitive. I oversee all technical development at this company. Intellectual property belongs to the company anyway, sweetheart. You're part of the team, not a solo artist. The dismissive tone and the word sweetheart made my blood boil, but I kept my voice level. I understand team collaboration, but the algorithms are specifically my work. My name is on the provisional patents, and I have documentation proving I created every component. Bradley's expression hardened slightly. Look, we all contribute in different ways. I provide the vision and strategic direction. You handle the implementation. That's how teams work in the real world. Don't make this complicated. I left his office feeling confused and frustrated, but not yet alarmed. Maybe I was being oversensitive. Maybe this was just how corporate dynamics worked, and I needed to adjust my expectations. After all, I'd never worked at a startup before. But that night, lying awake in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had just shifted in my relationship with Innovate Tech. Everything changed when Tech Global Industries approached us about a potential acquisition. Tech Global was a Fortune 500 company specializing in supply chain solutions for major retailers, and they'd been watching our Flowcast demonstrations with keen interest. Marcus Sterling became obsessed with the potential $50 million deal, talking about it constantly during staff meetings and reorganizing our entire company operations around the acquisition timeline. The laid-back startup culture I'd fallen in love with evaporated almost overnight. Suddenly, we had mandatory meetings about presentation readiness and corporate alignment. The ping-pong table got moved to storage to make the office look more professional. Casual Fridays disappeared, replaced by a dress code requiring business-appropriate attire at all times. Most concerning, employees were required to sign new non-disclosure agreements and non-compete clauses that were far more restrictive than our original employment contracts. I signed the documents because everyone else did, but the legal language made me uncomfortable. The new NDAs specifically prohibited discussing proprietary technology development with anyone outside the company, including family members. The non-compete agreements would prevent me from working in logistics software for 2 years if I left Innovate Tech, effectively blacklisting me from my chosen specialty. Meanwhile, Bradley began systematically excluding me from technical discussions about Flowcast. Previously, it'd been included in every client meeting and development planning session. Now, I found out about important decisions secondhand through company emails or overheard conversations. When I asked about upcoming technical presentations to Tech Global, Bradley told me they were executive-level discussions that didn't require my participation. The exclusion felt deliberate and personal. During one team meeting, Bradley announced that he would be the primary technical contact for all Tech Global communications. We need to present a unified leadership voice, he explained, not making eye contact with me. Too many technical voices will confuse the acquisition process. I discovered that Bradley had been meeting privately with Tech Global representatives multiple times per week. These meetings weren't on the company calendar, and had scheduled them during times when I was typically focused on development work. Amy Chen, our project manager, mentioned seeing Tech Global executives in our conference room on at least 3 occasions when I was working from home. Even more alarming, My direct access to our company servers became mysteriously restricted. Suddenly, I needed Bradley's approval to access repositories containing my own code. When I asked Jennifer Walsh in HR about the access changes, she claimed it was part of security upgrades required for the acquisition process. But none of my other colleagues reported similar restrictions. Marcus Sterling's attitude toward me shifted dramatically as well. Previously, Head treated me as a valued senior engineer whose opinions carried weight in technical discussions. Now he spoke to me like a junior employee, explaining basic concepts I'd mastered years ago and dismissing my input during planning meetings. When I suggested improvements to Flowcast's algorithm efficiency, he nodded politely and then completely ignored my recommendations. The personal stakes were getting higher every day. I'd been planning to use my equity shares and Flowcast recognition to eventually start my own consulting firm. The success of my algorithms would open doors throughout the logistics industry, and I'd already received informal inquiries from other companies about potential consulting work. But my employment contract strictly prohibited any outside work, and the pending acquisition would make job transitions complicated. My family situation added additional pressure. My younger brother Jake had just graduated from Oregon State with a computer science degree, and he was struggling to find entry-level positions in the competitive Portland job market. I'd been helping him with rent and student loan payments, which meant I needed my Innovate tech salary to remain stable. Additionally, my mother was facing mounting medical bills for treatment of chronic kidney disease, and my health insurance through Innovate Tech covered some of her prescription medications. I couldn't afford to lose this job, but I also couldn't ignore what was happening to my life's work. The situation reached a breaking point when I discovered backup files that made everything crystal clear. While performing routine system maintenance, I found old email threads that revealed the true scope of what Bradley and Marcus were doing. Original patent applications had been refiled under Bradley's name only, with my name removed completely. Technical specifications and company marketing materials had been rewritten to minimize my contributions, describing me as a contributing team member rather than the primary developer. Most damaging were email instructions from Bradley to Jennifer Walsh in HR. Please update all company materials to reflect appropriate leadership hierarchy. Head. Written. Downgrade Trisha's role in Flowcast development to avoid confusion during acquisition discussions. Technical credit should flow through proper management channels. I printed copies of these emails and stored them in my apartment, knowing I needed evidence of what was happening. But I felt completely isolated and powerless. Who could I talk to? Everyone at Innovate Tech reported either directly or indirectly to Marcus or Bradley. My friends outside the tech industry wouldn't understand the legal implications of intellectual property theft. My family was depending on my income stability. That's when I received an anonymous email that changed everything. The subject line was simply, "You should know this." The message contained internal company documents I'd never seen before, including detailed acquisition timeline plans and communication strategies. But the most shocking revelation was a document titled Post-Acquisition Personnel Planning that outlined Marcus and Bradley's intention to terminate my employment immediately after the Tech Global deal closed. The rationale was spelled out in cold, corporate language. Eliminate potential IP claims and reduce ongoing liability by removing original developer from payroll. All necessary technical knowledge has been transferred to appropriate management personnel. They were planning to fire me as soon as they no longer needed me, ensuring I'd have no legal standing to claim ownership or recognition for Flowcast. Everything suddenly made perfect sense. The exclusion from meetings, the access restrictions, the systematic removal of my name from documentation. It was all preparation for stealing my life's work and then discarding me entirely. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the anonymous email and printed documents spread across my kitchen table. For the first time since joining Innovate Tech, I realized I was in a fight for my professional survival. They had more money, more connections, and more legal resources than I could ever hope to match. But I had something they didn't have: the truth, and documentation to prove it. I spent the next 3 days researching employment lawyers in Portland, reading reviews and checking credentials until my eyes burned from staring at my laptop screen. The anonymous documents had shaken me to my core, but they also provided clarity about what I was facing. This wasn't miscommunication or corporate politics. This was systematic theft of my intellectual property. And I needed professional help. Sarah Martinez Law Firm specialized in employment disputes and intellectual property cases. Her website featured several successful cases against tech companies that had tried to steal employee innovations. During our initial consultation at her downtown Portland office, she reviewed my provisional patents, engineering notebooks, and the email evidence I'd gathered. "Tricia, you have an exceptionally strong case," Sarah told me, spreading my documentation across her conference table. "Companies cannot retroactively claim ownership of inventions created before employment agreements are signed. Your provisional patents and time-stamped development records clearly establish your authorship of Flowcast's core technology." The legal validation felt like the first breath of fresh air I'd taken in weeks. Sarah explained that Oregon law specifically protected employee inventors when they could prove independent development of their innovations. My meticulous documentation habits, which had always been a personal quirk, were now my strongest legal asset. However, the emotional toll of the situation was becoming overwhelming. I'd lost 15 pounds over 3 weeks, surviving mostly on coffee and anxiety. Sleep became elusive as my mind raced through potential scenarios and consequences. Every interaction at work felt loaded with hidden meaning and potential threat. When Bradley said good morning, was he being genuinely friendly or gathering intelligence about my state of mind? My relationship with David, my boyfriend of 2 years, became strained as I became completely consumed by the Innovate tech situation. He worked in marketing for a local brewery and couldn't relate to the technical or legal complexities I was facing. "Maybe you're overthinking this," he suggested during dinner one night. "Startups are chaotic. Things will probably work out once the acquisition goes through." But I couldn't explain to him how it felt to watch someone else take credit for algorithms I'd created from scratch, for code I'd written during countless late nights when everyone else had gone home. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal. These people had been my work family, and they were systematically erasing me from my own accomplishments. Sarah advised me to discreetly gather additional evidence while maintaining normal work behavior. "Don't let them know you're building a legal case," she warned. "If they suspect you're preparing to fight back, they might accelerate their timeline or take defensive actions that could complicate our strategy." I felt like a spy in my own workplace. I created secure backup copies of all my original code, uploading files to encrypted cloud storage accounts they couldn't monitor. I printed and photographed email threads, technical documentation, and any other materials that proved my authorship of Flowcast. Most importantly, I started recording conversations during meetings where Flowcast was discussed. In the European Union application, he described me as a junior programmer who assisted with implementation under direct supervision. The evidence was overwhelming, but gathering it was destroying my mental health. I questioned my own memories and capabilities constantly. Had I really created Flowcast independently, or was I remembering events incorrectly? Was Bradley's technical input more significant than I'd realized? Maybe I was being paranoid and defensive about normal corporate dynamics. Sarah reassured me during our second meeting that my self-doubt was a natural response to psychological manipulation. "They're gaslighting you," she explained. "Making you question your own experiences and achievements is a classic tactic used by people stealing intellectual property. Your documentation proves the truth, regardless of how they're trying to make you feel." I decided to approach Marcus Sterling directly, hoping he might address the situation fairly if I presented the facts clearly. Despite everything that had happened, part of me still believed in the man who had hired me and initially celebrated my innovations. Maybe he didn't fully understand what Bradley was doing. Maybe he'd be horrified to learn about the patent fraud and systematic credit theft. I spent an entire weekend preparing a detailed presentation showing my original work, development timeline, and clear evidence of my sole authorship of Flowcast's core technology. I included screenshots of my provisional patents, photos of my engineering notebooks, and even early code repositories with timestamp evidence. If Marcus was the ethical leader it initially believed him to be, this evidence would compel him to address Bradley's behavior and protect my intellectual property rights. Sarah advised me to document everything and have witnesses present for any major conversations. If this goes badly, we need records of their response to your evidence, she explained. Their reaction will be important for our legal case. My anxiety reached breaking point as I prepared for the confrontation. My entire career future hung in the balance. If Marcus sided with Bradley, I'd be fighting the entire company leadership. If he agreed to protect my rights, maybe we could resolve this without destroying my employment or the company relationships it valued. The night before my planned meeting with Marcus, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept reviewing my presentation materials, making sure every fact was accurate and every argument was clear. Around 3 a.m., I decided to check my work computer one more time to ensure I had copies of all relevant files. That's when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Bradley had already begun transferring Flowcast code to his personal GitHub repository. Hundreds of files were being copied to an external account I'd never seen before. The commit messages were revealing. Preparing core algorithms for new venture and IP migration for upcoming opportunities. He wasn't just planning to steal credit for my work within Innovate Tech. He was preparing to take the technology with him to a completely different company, probably as part of a secret deal with tech global executives. This wasn't corporate politics or ego battles. This was outright theft on a massive scale. I took screenshots of everything and immediately sent copies to Sarah's secure email. Then, I sat in my apartment, staring at the evidence and realizing that tomorrow's conversation with Marcus would determine whether I had any future in the tech industry at all. Friday afternoon, I requested a private meeting with Marcus Sterling in his corner office. The room felt different now, more intimidating than welcoming. With its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland and walls lined with startup achievement awards, Marcus sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I presented my evidence calmly and professionally, spreading the documents across his desk like a prosecutor laying out a case. Original patent applications with my name and timestamp proof. Engineering notebooks filled with my handwriting and algorithm sketches. Email threads showing Bradley's instructions to remove my authorship credits. I walked him through the development timeline, explaining how each component of Flowcast had emerged from my individual work. Marcus, I think there's been some confusion about intellectual property ownership, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. These documents show that I developed Flowcast's core technology independently before signing any company IP agreements. The provisional patents are in my name because I am the sole inventor. Marcus listened silently, his expression growing increasingly cold and defensive as I spoke. He picked up each document, examining it briefly before setting it aside with obvious dismissal. When I finished my presentation, he leaned back in his chair and fixed me with a stare that felt like ice. Trisha, I'm disappointed that you would come to me with this adversarial approach, he said, his voice carrying none of the warmth I remembered from my early days at Innovate Tech. Everything you've shown me represents collaborative work performed as an Innovate Tech employee. Your provisional patents are irrelevant technicalities that don't override your employment obligations. I felt my heart sink, but I pressed forward. Marcus, look at the timestamps. I filed these patents before I signed any company agreements. I documented every algorithm decision independently. This isn't collaboration. This is individual invention that I brought to the company. His eyes narrowed. Young lady, you seem to have a fundamental misunderstanding of how startups operate. We're a team here. Individual credit isn't how we measure success. Bradley provides leadership and vision. You provide implementation support. That's your role, and it's a valuable one, but it's not ownership. Before I could respond, the office door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Bradley Sterling stood in the doorway, his face red with rage, clearly having been monitoring our conversation somehow. His hands were clenched into fists, and his voice shook with fury when he spoke. "You've been talking to lawyers about us," he screamed, pointing an accusatory finger directly at my face. "I knew you were disloyal. I knew you couldn't be trusted." The sudden explosion of anger made me recoil instinctively. Marcus made no attempt to calm his son or control the situation. Instead, he watched with what looked like satisfaction as Bradley continued his verbal assault. "You think you can threaten this company? Threaten our acquisition? You're nothing but an ungrateful employee who can't accept her place in the organizational hierarchy." Bradley's voice got louder with each sentence. "You're committing corporate espionage. You're betraying the company family that gave you everything." I found my voice through the shock. "Bradley, I documented my own work. I'm protecting intellectual property that I created independently. That's not espionage. That's legal ownership. Legal ownership." He laughed bitterly. "You don't own anything. You're an employee. Everything you think, everything you code, everything you create belongs to Innovate Tech. That's how employment works." Marcus finally spoke, but only to support his son's position. "Bradley is right, Tricia. Your behavior is completely inappropriate. Consulting lawyers about internal company matters represents a serious breach of trust and potentially a violation of your employment agreement." The accusation felt like a physical blow. I consulted a lawyer because my intellectual property rights were being violated. That's not a breach of trust. That's protecting myself from theft. Bradley moved closer, his face twisted with contempt. "Theft? Theft? We made you. We gave you a platform to implement algorithms that you never could have developed without our resources, our vision, our leadership." He swept his arm toward the engineering notebooks scattered on Marcus' desk. "These worthless papers don't change the fact that you're nothing without this company." As if summoned by some pre-arranged signal, building security appeared in the doorway. Two men in uniform, polo shirts with clipboards and official expressions. My stomach dropped as I realized this confrontation had been planned from the moment I requested the meeting. Marcus stood behind his desk, his voice now formal and cold. "Tricia Coleman, your employment with Innovate Tech Solutions is terminated effective immediately for breach of trust, insubordination, and unauthorized legal consultation regarding proprietary company matters." The words hit me like physical blows. 3 years of my life, countless late nights, my proudest professional achievements, ended with corporate buzzwords delivered like a judge pronouncing sentence. Bradley stepped forward, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Clean out your desk," he commanded, standing over me, with his arms crossed like a victorious conqueror. "Security will escort you to ensure you don't steal any company property on your way out." The humiliation was designed to be complete and public. As I gathered my personal belongings from Marcus' office, I could see other employees watching through the glass walls. My former colleagues avoided eye contact, probably terrified they might be next if they showed any sympathy. The security escort through our open-plan office felt like a perp walk. Jennifer Walsh from HR appeared with a scripted termination letter that she read in a monotone voice, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Employee terminated for insubordination, breach of company policy, and unauthorized legal consultation. Final paycheck adjusted for equipment replacement fees and outstanding obligations." My company laptop and phone were confiscated before I even reached my desk. They'd disabled my email and building access before I made it to the parking lot. I packed my personal items, my engineering notebooks, and 3 years of memories into a cardboard box while my former teammates pretended to be busy at their computers. Amy Chen caught my eye as I walked past her desk. She mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," but didn't dare speak aloud. I understood. Everyone was terrified, and I didn't blame them for protecting themselves. I sat in my car in the Innovate Tech parking lot for 30 minutes, crying harder than I had since my father's funeral 5 years earlier. The cardboard box of personal belongings sat in my passenger seat, like evidence of a life that had just been erased. 3 years of work, 3 years of believing in a company mission, 3 years of thinking I was building something meaningful with people who respected and valued my contributions. All of it was gone. When I finally composed myself enough to drive home, I called Sarah Martinez from the road. My voice was shaking with anger, despair, and disbelief. They fired me, Sarah. They had security escort me out like I was a criminal. They claimed my patent documentation is irrelevant and that consulting you was a breach of trust. Sarah's response was immediate and reassuring. Trisha, what they just did actually strengthens our legal case significantly. Retaliatory termination for consulting an attorney about legitimate legal concerns is illegal in Oregon. They've just provided us with additional evidence of their bad faith and consciousness of guilt. When I reached my apartment, David was waiting with takeout Thai food and a bottle of wine. He held me while I sobbed about 3 years of my life being stolen, about algorithms it created being claimed by people who couldn't even understand how they worked. They made me feel like I was nothing. I whispered into his shoulder. Like my work didn't matter, like I didn't matter. That evening, I checked my bank account and discovered my final paycheck had been reduced by nearly $1,500 due to equipment replacement fees and other dubious charges. They were trying to hurt me financially as well as professionally. But just as I was falling into complete despair, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was short but electrifying. Emergency. Meet me at Powell's Books tomorrow at 2 p.m. They don't know I copied something important for you. Don't respond to this message. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Someone was willing to help me, even after witnessing what Innovate Tech had just done to me for fighting back. Maybe this wasn't over after all. The next afternoon, I found Amy Chen waiting for me in the technical section of Powell's Books, pretending to browse programming manuals while glancing nervously around the store. When she saw me, she gestured toward a quiet corner between the shelves where we could talk privately. They fired me yesterday afternoon, Amy whispered, her voice shaking with anger. 20 minutes after you left, Bradley called me into his office and accused me of being your co-conspirator. They said my employment was terminated for enabling disloyal behavior and failure to report suspicious employee activities. I felt sick. Amy, I'm so sorry. I never meant to get you involved in this. She shook her head firmly. Don't you dare apologize. What they're doing to you is theft, and what they did to me proves they're panicking. She pulled a flash drive from her purse and pressed it into my hand. Before they fired me, I copied Tech Global's complete due diligence requirements. You need to see what they're really worried about. Back in my apartment, I plugged in Amy's flash drive and discovered documents that changed everything. Tech Global's lawyers had specifically requested complete intellectual property ownership verification for all core technologies before finalizing the acquisition. The requirements were extraordinarily detailed, demanding original patent filings, development documentation, and legal proof of unencumbered ownership for every piece of proprietary technology. Amy had also copied email threads between Marcus Sterling and Tech Global's acquisition team. The messages revealed that Bradley had panicked after my firing because he realized they couldn't actually prove company ownership of Flowcast. Tech Global's technical team had been asking increasingly specific questions about the algorithm's development history, and Bradley's answers were becoming inconsistent and evasive. Due diligence review scheduled for Monday, one email read. Tech Global insisting on presence of all patent holders for verification process. Legal concerns about IP ownership may delay acquisition timeline. That's when everything clicked. Tech Global wasn't just buying Innovate Tech, they were specifically buying Flowcast. Without clear ownership of the core technology, there was no acquisition deal. Marcus and Bradley had fired me thinking they could eliminate the ownership problem, but instead they'd created a bigger legal nightmare. I immediately called Sarah Martinez and shared Amy's intelligence. Sarah's reaction was swift and decisive. "We're filing an emergency injunction first thing Monday morning to prevent any sale or transfer of Flowcast technology. I'm also sending cease and desist letters to both Innovate Tech and Tech Global, demanding they acknowledge your intellectual property rights." "But Sarah, they'll claim I'm just a disgruntled employee trying to sabotage their business deal." "Trisha, that's exactly what makes this so perfect. Your patents and documentation prove you're not a disgruntled employee, you're the rightful inventor protecting your intellectual property. And thanks to their retaliation against you and Amy, we can prove they fired you specifically to steal your technology." Sarah filed paperwork demanding that I be present at all due diligence meetings as the legal patent holder. Innovate Tech's lawyers tried to block my participation. But Oregon's intellectual property laws were clear. Patent holders have standing in any transaction involving their inventions. Monday morning, I sat in Tech Global's gleaming conference room at their headquarters downtown, watching the most important meeting of my professional life unfold. The room felt like a corporate courtroom, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River and a mahogany table large enough to seat 20 people. Tech Global's legal team was led by Robert Harrison, a senior partner known for his aggressive approach to acquisition due diligence. His reputation in Portland's business community was legendary. He'd killed more deals over IP concerns than any other corporate lawyer in the Pacific Northwest. Across the table, Marcus Sterling and Bradley Sterling sat wearing expensive new suits, projecting confidence they clearly didn't feel. Sarah Martinez sat beside me, our documentation organized in neat piles that represented 3 years of my life's work. I felt like David facing Goliath, except my slingshot was loaded with timestamps, code repositories, and legal proof instead of stones. Harrison methodically reviewed patent filings, copyright registrations, and development records, while Marcus presented company documents claiming full ownership of all employee inventions. Bradley gave a technical presentation about Flowcast's capabilities, but I noticed him stumbling over basic algorithm questions that any true developer would answer effortlessly. The tension in the room built steadily as Harrison's questions became more pointed. "Mr. Sterling, can you walk me through the machine learning model architecture for demand prediction?" Bradley's answer revealed surface-level knowledge at best. "What specific optimization techniques were used for real-time processing?" Another stumbling response that made Tech Global's technical team exchange concerned glances. Then Harrison reached for a manila folder that would change everything. He slid official patent documents across the mahogany table to Marcus Sterling, and the sound of paper sliding across polished wood seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent room. "Mr. Sterling, I need you to read aloud the sole proprietor designation for Flowcast core technology patents," Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd conducted hundreds of these reviews. Marcus Sterling's hands visibly shook as he picked up the documents. His face went pale as he read the patent header silently to himself. The room fell completely quiet except for the hum of air conditioning and distant traffic sounds from the street below. "The sole proprietor listed is..." Marcus' voice cracked slightly. "Trisha Coleman." Every person in that conference room turned to look at me. Tech Global's executives, their lawyers, their technical team, all staring at the woman that assumed was just a disgruntled former employee. The founder's expression crumbled as he processed what his own voice had just confirmed. Bradley Sterling's face drained of all color. His mouth opened and closed without making sound, like a fish gasping for air. For 3 years, had been claiming ownership of technology he couldn't even fully understand. And now the legal truth was exposed in front of the people who could make or break his family's future. Harrison's next words cut through the silence like a blade. "Due diligence review is terminated immediately. Tech Global Industries cannot proceed with acquisition of technology assets that are not legally owned by the selling entity. This represents fundamental misrepresentation of core assets." Marcus Sterling attempted to salvage the situation. "The employment agreements clearly state that all employee inventions become company property. Patent technicalities don't override contractual obligations. Harrison's response was swift and final. Mr. Sterling, intellectual property law supersedes employment contracts when patents were filed prior to employment agreements. Additionally, misrepresenting asset ownership during due diligence constitutes fraud, which could result in criminal charges as well as civil liability. Tech Global's technical team had been quietly reviewing printed copies of my algorithm documentation during the legal discussion. Their lead engineer, a woman named Patricia Wong, looked up from the papers with obvious excitement. These algorithms are genuinely revolutionary. The efficiency improvements alone would save us millions in logistics costs annually. Harrison turned to me directly for the first time. Miss Coleman, Tech Global had been planning to offer you a personal consulting contract worth $2 million over 5 years, contingent on verified invention status. Given today's revelations, we'd like to discuss direct employment as our lead AI architect, bypassing Innovate Tech entirely. The irony was perfect. They'd fired me to steal my technology, but instead, they delivered me directly into the hands of a company that actually understood its value and was willing to pay appropriately for my innovations. Marcus and Bradley Sterling left Tech Global's offices in stunned silence, their $50 million acquisition dream evaporating in the space of a single meeting. As their car disappeared into downtown traffic, I sat in that conference room realizing my career hadn't ended 3 days ago, it had actually just begun. The immediate aftermath of the Tech Global meeting felt surreal. Within hours, I found myself in private discussions with Harrison and Tech Global's executive team, negotiating an employment package that exceeded my wildest expectations. They offered me a senior AI architect position, equity shares in their logistics division, and full legal support for any actions against Innovate Tech. Sarah Martinez worked through the weekend drafting our legal strategy. Tech Global's resources meant I now had access to a team of intellectual property lawyers who specialized in high-stakes corporate litigation. The balance of power had shifted completely in my favor. Innovate Tech's response was predictably desperate. Their lawyers immediately filed counterclaims alleging I had violated employment agreements and stolen company trade secrets. They claimed my algorithm documentation was created using company resources and therefore belonged to Innovate Tech regardless of patent ownership. But Sarah's evidence was overwhelming. My provisional patents predated any company agreements by 6 months. My personal engineering notebooks contained handwritten algorithm development that clearly occurred before ID ever heard of Innovate Tech. Most importantly, my code repositories included timestamp evidence, showing ID created the foundational algorithms during my graduate school thesis work. The Oregon Department of Labor opened an investigation into Innovate Tech's employment practices after Amy Chen and I filed formal complaints about retaliatory termination. 2 other female employees came forward with similar stories of discrimination and credit theft. Jennifer Walsh in HR was subpoenaed to provide personnel records and internal communications about termination decisions. Marcus Sterling, realizing his company was facing potential bankruptcy, requested a private settlement meeting with Sarah and me. We met at Sarah's law firm on a rainy Thursday afternoon, and Marcus looked like he'd aged years in the past 2 weeks. His confident executive demeanor had been replaced by the desperate attitude of a man watching his life's work collapse. "Tricia, I want to offer you reinstatement with full back pay and an equity settlement," he began, sliding a settlement offer across the conference table. "We can resolve this without destroying relationships or damaging reputations." I looked at the document briefly before sliding it back. "Marcus, you had 3 years to respect my contributions and protect my intellectual property rights. You chose to systematically steal my work instead. Reinstatement isn't enough to repair that betrayal." Sarah spoke for me. "Our client demands full acknowledgement of her intellectual property rights, monetary damages for wrongful termination, and public correction of the record regarding Flowcast development." Bradley Sterling, who had remained silent until now, finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. Tricia, You're destroying a company that gave you everything. You're bankrupting families, ruining careers, destroying the startup ecosystem in Portland, all because you couldn't accept your role as a team member." His words revealed everything I needed to know about his character. Even facing legal defeat, he couldn't acknowledge the theft or accept responsibility for his actions. "Bradley, I'm not destroying anything. I'm protecting intellectual property that I created and that you stole. If that destroys your company, maybe you should have built your business on honest foundations." The Portland Business Journal published a detailed article about intellectual property theft at local startups the following week. Technology blogs picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about founder ethics and employee rights. Innovate Tech's reputation in the Portland startup community became severely damaged as other portfolio companies and investors distanced themselves from the scandal. Several major clients canceled their contracts with Innovate Tech, citing concerns about company ethics and legal stability. The very acquisition discussions that had triggered this entire conflict became impossible as potential buyers refused to negotiate with a company facing multiple fraud investigations. Meanwhile, my personal life began recovering from the trauma of the past month. David surprised me with a proposal during a celebration dinner at our favorite restaurant overlooking the Columbia River. "Your courage through all of this inspired me," he said, presenting a ring head, apparently been planning to give me for months. "I want to build a life with someone who fights for what's right, even when it's terrifying." My mother cried with pride while reading newspaper coverage of my legal victory. Shed never fully understood the technical aspects of my work, but she understood that her daughter had stood up to powerful people who tried to steal from her. "Your father would be so proud," she told me over the phone. "He always said you had more backbone than anyone he knew." Former colleagues from Innovate Tech began reaching out privately to apologize for not supporting me during the termination. They'd been scared for their own jobs, which I completely understood. But their messages of support meant more than they probably realized. Even Jennifer Walsh from HR contacted me to express regret about her role in the company's actions. Portland State University invited me to speak at their entrepreneurship program about intellectual property protection for student inventors. Standing in the same lecture hall where Id attended classes 5 years earlier, I addressed a room full of young engineers and computer science students about the importance of documenting their work and understanding their legal rights. The business consequences for Innovate Tech became increasingly severe as the investigation expanded. The remaining employees began job searching as company finances deteriorated and legal costs mounted. Marcus Sterling was forced to mortgage his personal home to pay attorney fees and potential settlements. Bradley Sterling's reputation in the technology industry became toxic. Word spread quickly through Portland's tight-knit tech community about his fraud and theft. Other companies refused to hire him, and investors avoided any ventures associated with his name. Head destroyed his own career by trying to steal mine. Tech Global's acquisition offer was permanently withdrawn, but they honored their commitment to hire me as their lead AI architect. My first day at their downtown Portland offices felt like stepping into a completely different universe from the startup culture I'd left behind. Professional, ethical, and respectful treatment was simply the baseline expectation rather than something to be grateful for. Just when I thought the legal battles were winding down, Jennifer Walsh contacted Sarah Martinez with information that would deliver one final blow to Innovate Tech. Shed discovered additional evidence of systematic wage theft and discrimination against female employees that had been occurring for years. The evidence included email instructions to pay women less than men for equivalent work and performance evaluations that used gendered language to minimize female employees' technical contributions. Jennifer wanted to join a class action lawsuit that could shut down Innovate Tech permanently and provide compensation for all the women whose careers had been damaged by the company's discriminatory practices. The evidence Shed preserved included HR records, salary spreadsheets, and internal communications that proved deliberate and systematic discrimination. Within weeks, 3 more former female employees joined our legal action. The class action lawsuit expanded beyond intellectual property theft to encompass years of discriminatory employment practices. Innovate Tech's insurance company began pressuring Marcus to settle rather than face a trial that could result in millions of dollars in damages and criminal charges. The company that had tried to erase my contributions and steal my life's work was now facing complete destruction due to their own unethical actions. Justice was being served not just for me, but for every woman they'd mistreated over the years. 6 months after that devastating termination meeting, Innovate Tech Solutions officially declared bankruptcy rather than face extended litigation costs and mounting settlements. Marcus Sterling signed documents acknowledging systematic discrimination and intellectual property theft, formally transferring all rights to Flowcast technology back to me. The settlement included monetary damages that covered my legal costs and provided compensation for wrongful termination. Most importantly, Bradley Sterling was required to sign a public statement acknowledging my sole authorship of Flowcast's core algorithms and apologizing for misrepresenting my contributions to clients and investors. Reading his written admission that Tricia Coleman is the rightful inventor of all Flowcast technology provided closure I hadn't realized I needed. My first day as senior AI architect at Tech Global Industries exceeded every professional aspiration I'd ever held. My private office overlooked Mount Hood, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a research budget that would have seemed impossible at a small startup. More importantly, I had a team of 12 brilliant engineers reporting to me, including Amy Chen, whom I specifically requested to hire as my project manager. The Flowcast integration project became Tech Global's most successful technology implementation in 5 years. My algorithms saved the company over $10 million in logistics costs during the first year alone, validating every late night and weekend I'd spent perfecting the code. Company executives credited the Flowcast acquisition as a transformative addition to their supply chain capabilities. David and I were married 8 months after the settlement, in a small ceremony overlooking the Columbia River. During his wedding speech, he said the past year had taught him that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite being terrified of the consequences. My brother Jake graduated from Oregon State and joined my new team as a junior developer, finally able to start his career in Portland's tech industry. My relationship with my mother deepened as she recovered from her kidney disease treatment. She finally understood why I'd been so passionate about my work and so devastated when it was stolen. I never realized how much of yourself you put into those computer programs, she told me. No wonder it felt like they were trying to steal your soul. Professional recognition followed quickly. I was featured on the cover of IEEE Technology magazine as their Innovator of the Year, with a feature article about algorithm development and intellectual property protection. The magazine profile included my complete story about fighting Innovate Tech's theft, positioning me as an advocate for inventor rights in the technology industry. Speaking engagements at technology conferences became regular opportunities to mentor other engineers, particularly women facing discrimination or credit theft. The Women in Technology conference in San Francisco asked me to deliver their keynote address about intellectual property protection and workplace advocacy. Standing on that stage, addressing 2,000 female engineers, I realized my ordeal had given me a platform to prevent others from experiencing similar betrayal. Through Portland State University's entrepreneurship program, I began mentoring graduate students about documenting their innovations and understanding their legal rights. Many of them were developing potentially revolutionary technologies during their thesis work, just as I had, and they needed to understand how to protect their intellectual property before entering corporate environments. I filed 3 additional patent applications for algorithm improvements I developed at Tech Global, this time with full corporate support and proper legal protections. My name appears prominently on all technical documentation, and my contributions are celebrated rather than minimized or stolen. The therapy sessions I began during the worst days of the Innovate Tech conflict helped me process the trauma of betrayal and rebuild my professional confidence. Dr. Lisa Chen, my therapist, helped me understand that toxic workplace cultures create psychological damage that extends far beyond immediate employment concerns. Recovery required acknowledging the emotional impact of having my identity as an innovator systematically attacked and erased. Driving past the shuttered Innovate tech offices 6 months later, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the colleagues whose careers were damaged by Marcus and Bradley's poor decisions. Relief that their toxic culture could no longer hurt other employees. The ping-pong table and craft beer Fridays had never been worth tolerating theft, discrimination, and systematic credit theft. I harbor no regret about fighting for my intellectual property rights despite the emotional cost and professional risk. The alternative would have been watching other people profit from my innovations, while I started over with nothing to show for 3 years of my life's work. Sometimes protecting your future requires risking everything you have in the present. The most important lesson I learned is that intellectual property theft thrives in environments of silence and shame, but transparency and legal action expose the truth. Documenting your work isn't paranoia. It's professional self-preservation. Filing patents isn't selfish. It's protecting the foundation of your career. Consulting lawyers isn't disloyalty. It's ensuring you receive appropriate recognition for your contributions. Standing up to powerful people who try to steal your achievements requires courage, but protecting your life's work requires everything you have. The technology industry depends on innovation, and innovation depends on inventors receiving appropriate recognition and compensation for their contributions. When companies steal intellectual property, they're not just harming individual employees, they're undermining the entire ecosystem that drives technological progress. Looking back, I realized that losing my job at Innovate Tech was the best thing that could have happened to my career. Their betrayal forced me to fight for my rights, which led to opportunities I never would have pursued otherwise. Sometimes the universe forces you onto a better path by making your current situation intolerable. Tech Global's ethical culture and professional respect for my contributions creates an environment where I can focus on innovation rather than protecting myself from theft. My algorithms are improving supply chain efficiency for major retailers across North America, and my name appears proudly on every patent and publication. This is how technology development should work. Brilliant people creating innovative solutions and receiving appropriate recognition for their achievements. The legal victory established important precedent for intellectual property protection in Oregon's technology industry. Other inventors facing similar theft now have case law supporting their rights, and employment lawyers can point to our success when advising clients about workplace discrimination and credit theft. My story proves that fighting for your rights, even when it seems impossible, can lead to justice and opportunity beyond your original expectations. Never let anyone steal your dreams, your innovations, or your future. Because when you fight for what's rightfully yours, sometimes the universe fights back with you. Have you ever had to fight for recognition of your work or ideas? What would you do if someone tried to take credit for your innovations? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you to stand up for your rights or pursue your dreams despite obstacles, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about courage and justice. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear about fighting for what's right, even when it's terrifying. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that your work, your ideas, and your future are worth fighting for. No matter how powerful the people trying to steal them might seem.